Chapter 5, the Aramaic language. In the first book of Moses, chapter 11, verse 1, we are told that previous to the confusion of tongues at Babel, the whole earth was of one language and one speech. Let's have a look at that particular verse in the Brita in the Aramaic, or Genesis in English. Genesis chapter 11 verse 1, translated into the nearest English equivalent by native born Aramaic speaking translator Victor Nimrod Alexander from Betnarim, or Mesopotamia, Syria. To verify that with the scriptures, Genesis 11, or Brita in Aramaic. 1. And the whole earth was one language, and everyone spoke the same dialect. There's a footnote indicator here, so we'll have a look at that. 11.1. Literal Aramaic idiomatic construction. And all the earth was one tongue and spoke one. And here he's saying that the entire peoples spoke one language, or one tongue. They only spoke that one. Okay, so let's go back to what this author says. As a consequence, we have to assume that the language of the paradise and the tongue spoken in Noah's Ark was one and the same. The one at paradise was the old tongue, the sacred scribal language of God, the Lishana Atika Sapreya, according to the Brita, translated by the native born Aramaic speaking translator Victor Alexander. As Noah lived 350 years after the deluge, or after the flood, and his son Shem 500 years, the language of the ark was in existence. Years after the confusion, we reach down to the times of Abraham the patriarch. We may further assume that Shem and Abraham met and talked with each other in the language of the ark. So have a look at that. Brita, or Genesis 11:2. And as it was that they came from the east, footnote indicator, they found an empty spot in the land of Sumer, and they settled there. Okay, possibly this was the original name, Sumer, but then the Greeks came along and added the N prefix onto it and made it Sumeria. (11.2) Literal Aramaic idiomatic figure of speech, they took from the east. It's a weird way of them saying they came from the east, possibly. And they said a man to his friend, again let us cast bricks and burn them in fire. And bricks became their stone, and they used bitumen for mortar. And they said, let us again build ourselves a city and a ziggurat, which is Persian, for a tower, with its head in the sky, and let us call ourselves by a name. Footnote indicated there. Basically it's saying nation. 11.4 Literal Aramaic idiomatic expression, make a name for ourselves, or use a national name. And they said, let us again build ourselves a city and a ziggurat with its head in the sky, and let us call ourselves by a name, so we do not end up scattered all over the earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the ziggurat that humanity had built. And the Lord said, behold, people are one people, and there is one language for all of them. And this is what they thought of doing. From now on they will not be at a loss to do whatever they imagine. Okay, so what we're thinking is, because he says, let us go down and divide the languages, so that men will not listen to the companions' tongues. Okay. Footnote indicated there, 7. Literal Aramaic idiomatic expression, retained, heed one each other, so they won't understand each other. They won't know what the other one's talking about, right? So here it's saying they divided the languages. They divide the languages, so they created separate languages, so that men would not listen to the companions' tongues. So if the guy right up the top says, "Hey, pass us some cement," you go, "What? What the hell are you talking about? We haven't got any peppermint," or something like that. You go, "No, cement." You go, "No, we don't have any sacrament." They were totally confused. Don't know what the hell he was talking about. So we're going to have a look at Shem, see if he was 500 years old. If we can find him here. Okay. So it's saying here, completely different to what they're saying in the Syriac from the Apostolic Church of the East, in this particular author. And Shem's line or lineage after the birth of Arpachshad was 500 years. He wasn't 500 years old. And to him were born many sons and daughters. And Arpachshad lived 35 years, and to him was born Shelah. Yeah, here it's saying they assume that Noah lived 350 years after the deluge, and his son Shem 500 years. Okay, so that's is that hinting that they were that old, that age? And the language of the ark was in existence years after the confusion. Because if they're saying that, it's actually incorrect. If this translator has translated from the original Tab Asheret, Nishana Artika Sapraya, sacred scribal language of God, the old tongue, and the Brita, or Genesis in the nearest English equivalent, and put it into the nearest English equivalent, then they were correct. So possibly they're using the modern Syriac. That could be the problem. So it's talking about lineage. It's not saying that Shem was 500 years old. Because it says here, Shem's line or lineage after the birth of Arpachshad was 500 years. That's how long it lasted. And to him were born many sons and daughters. And Arpachshad lived 35 years, and to him was born Shelah. So it's saying that Shem's lineage lasted 500 years. And then Arpachshad's lineage started, and they lasted for so many years. So they reached down to the times of Abraham the patriarch. We may further assume that Shem and Abraham met and talked with each other in the language of the ark. You're not too sure on that one. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Many languages were formed during the confusion, but the language of the paradise and the ark, the language in which the Lord himself spoke to the parents, Adam and Eve, that language was not touched and became the source and origin of all other languages, ancient and modern. So talking about the Aramaic, the Lishana Artika Sapraya, the sacred scribal language, the old tongue of God, that which he spoke to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. The Holy Writ records as a fact, beyond any doubt, that Mesopotamia is the cradle of the human race. That's where it all started. If you look at the Bible, it has like the river that flowed through paradise to water the garden, and then it split into 4 tributaries or heads, being the Gishon, the Pishon, the Euphrates and Tigris, and then it flowed through the land of Ashur, Mesopotamia, etc. The inhabitants of the country were the offspring of Shem. They were Semites. Yeah. In the first book of Moses, it is said, Brita or Genesis, it is said that Abraham went from Mesopotamia to the land of Canaan, but Lot went with him. It's his nephew. The sons of Arpachshad settled on the boundaries of Mesopotamia, and Ashur, a son of Jacob, and Aram lived in Mesopotamia proper. That country was called Aram, and the inhabitants Aramaeans. The Greek name of the country Mesopotamia, or the country between the rivers, in all probability is a translation of the earlier Aramaean name Beth-Narin, the country between the rivers, to which corresponds the biblical Aram Naharaim. In Genesis, the country is also called Padan Aram. Okay, so as we have been stating in a lot of our videos, This word Mesopotamia is Greek for the country between the rivers. A translation of the earlier Aramaic name Beth Narim. That's where Victor in Alexander, the Aramaic translator, comes from, in Syria. We are told that the offspring of Aram grew stronger and subdued the whole Mesopotamia, and for many centuries the Old Testament speaks of the country as Aramaic. Okay, this again is Greek addition. Okay, they've put an "en" prefix or suffix on the end of that, right? Meaning that these people that occupied it were of this forefather, the ancient forefather Aram, the descendants of him. Maybe they asked him, where did the language come from? They said, oh, from our forefather Aram. It's in the Genesis lineage account. His name is in there. In a secular history of the world, we are informed that Assyrians and Arameans lived there in the times of Christ and his apostles. The inhabitants of Mesopotamia were called Aramaeans, and the learned men of Syria called themselves Aramaeans. So these are the descendants of Shem to Shem, who lived 100 years and was born Apashgad 2 years after the flood. It's local flood, disastrous floods in the Mesopotamian area, according to the Timetables of History by Bernard Grun, the third edition, revised edition of Werner Stein's Culture Fahrplan, page 3, and also in accordance with what the Aramaic translator Victor Alexander has suggested us through email. We believe. And Shem's line after the birth of Apashgad was 500 years, and to him was born many sons and daughters, and Apashgad lived 35 years, and to him was born Shelah, and it goes right down here to Eber. Shelah's line after the birth of Eber, his son, his oldest son, was 403 years. That's his lineage, not how old he was. And to him were born many sons and daughters. And Eber lived 34 years, and to him was born Peleg. And carries on, and gets down to Abraham, stating those are the descendants of Terah. To Terah was born Abraham, because his name wasn't changed yet to Abraham. Nahor in Haran, and to Haran was born Lot. That's Abraham's nephew. And Haran lived during the time of Terah his father, in the land where he was born, of the Chaldees, or the city of the Chaldeans. Abraham and Nahor consecrated for themselves women. So through marriage, they became blessed, right? And the name of Abraham's woman was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's woman was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, who was the father of Milcah and Iscah. So this Sarai apparently was the half sister, because the father had some other wife apparently, and he had this daughter. So yeah, that would be his half sister, step sister, something like that. But in those days, well, I guess they had their belief and their reasons why they could do that, marry their half sister or step sister or whatever. Remember, he went into Egypt, and the king of Egypt, everyone said she was so beautiful that he wanted her. He was going to sleep with her, or marry her, all this sort of stuff, but he was warned in a vision, probably by God or through an angel or messenger or whatever, don't do it, or else you will suffer. Okay? And then Abraham was given all his wealth, etc., and apparently he went somewhere else, and the same sort of thing happened, and he get struck with this disease or some illness. The king and his whole family, etc., warned in a vision, and then Abraham got a lot of wealth from that, gained a lot of cattle, of stock, and other stuff. See, he knew, but he said, no. That was his wife, right? He said, no, this is my sister, which was sort of telling the truth, right? It's a half sister, right? But then when they found out through the warning, the vision, hey, she's your wife, why didn't you tell us, you know? And it happened that Sarai was barren, she had no children. She only got to Berita or Genesis 10. And these are the birth records of the children of Noah, Shem, Ham. So this here is, because the Egyptians are descendants of Noah and his sons, his 3 sons, their wording is pronounced exactly the same. It's not Cam or Cam, it's Ham or Ham, right? Because you have the Egyptian word which is exactly the same. The K is silent. You don't pronounce the K. It's like when you have Tav Asheret, you're not saying the K. It's silent. So this is the birth records of the children of Noah, Shem, Ham and Japheth, or Ham and Japheth, to whom was born children after the flood. And it goes on, and these are all the descendants, record of the descendants from these sons. And from these separated those that became the idol of the nations in their language, according to their culture and among their own people. So having those footmark indicators there, it will tell you here underneath 10 to 1 literal Aramaic name Germans became the Anglos, the Medes, the Greeks. But the last 3 names do not resemble any names that the translator was familiar with at the time. Probably translated about 2007 or 8 or something like that, or maybe a bit later. And it would take some research to find out the correct transliteration of the modern derivatives, the names for them, right? And 10:10. And to Cush with a C was born Nimrod, who began to be a giant of the earth. This is supposed to be Victor N. Alexander, the translator from Bet Syria's ancient ancestor. That's why he has the middle name Nimrod. He was a lion-hearted giant before the Lord. That is why it is said, like Nimrod, a lion-hearted giant before the Lord. And he was the head of this kingdom, which included Babylon, Erech, or Iraq today, Akkad, and Calah, in the land of Sumer. From these lands there emerged the Assyri. It's the Assyrians, who built Nineveh and the towns of Rehoboth and Calah, and Rezin, the great city between Nineveh and Calah. And to Mizraim was born Ludim, Anamim, Lehabim, and Caphtorim, and to Parusim and Calusim, from who emerged the Philistines and the Cappadocians, and so forth. Okay, we are looking for a particular verse. 10:21. And to Shem, Japheth's great brother, there were also born children. He became the father of all the children of passage. And his footnote indicated here, which was it 10:21? 10:21, literal Aramaic idiom or expression, Hebrews. 10:24, and to Arpachshad was born Shelah, and to Shelah was born Eber. Footnote indicator. 10:24, Aramaic, literal Aramaic name, Hebrew, comes from this name, Awer, A-W-E-R, and we had it verified by a Jewish speaking person. Said, yeah, that's in the Hebrew. Means the same thing. To cross over, or a crosser over, someone who crosses over, implying a passage. The peoples of Abraham that went over the 2 rivers, or made a journey to Canaan. So it matches what is being said here. In the secular history of the world, we are informed that Assyrians and Arameans lived there. In Mesopotamia. In the times of Christ and his apostles, the inhabitants of Mesopotamia were called Aramaeans, and the learned men of Syria called themselves Aramaeans, or Aramaeans. Abraham, the patriarch, is a descendant of Arphaxad, or Arpachshad. Depends on how they translate it, right? This guy here, Arpachshad. He's a descendant of that guy. Maybe that's got an X in the Syriac. He went from Ur, the city in Chaldea, and he and the house of his father are called Aramaeans. F.E. in the first book of Moses, chapter 25:20. Some of the sons of Japheth and Ham may have lived in Mesopotamia, but they never played any part of importance there. The offspring of Ham were the earliest settlers in Babylonia, but Aramaeans soon took the country and held it. There is a number of Semitic languages. Aramaic is mentioned above. Then there is the language of the Jews and the Arabic, the Phoenician and the Coptic languages. Best known are the Arabic, Aramaean and Hebraic, which are closely related to each other. The guy Shaka Amos did a video on YouTube to do with the top Assyriologist, maybe his name was Jacobson, something like that, and he showed a Wikipedia chart that all came from the Nabatean, the Damu supposedly, and the Nabatean was the grandparent language, was the parent language of the Aramaic, Syriac, Hebrew, and the grandchild language of all of these, of the Nabatean, was the Arabic. It was the child language of the Aramaic, the Syriac, the Hebrew. Some of the sons of Japheth and Ham may have lived in Mesopotamia, but they never played any part of importance there. The offspring of Ham were the earliest settlers in Babylonia, but Aramaeans soon took the country and held it. They invaded it, right? There's a number of Semitic languages. Aramaic is mentioned above. Then there's the language of the Jews and the Arabic, the Phoenician and the Coptic languages. Best known are the Arabic, Aramaean and Hebraic, which are closely related to each other. The Aramaic is the oldest sister language of the Hebrew, because the Hebrew, in this verse here, they were a bunch of people. Okay, they were peoples. They didn't speak that language. They probably spoke Akkadian, Chaldean. Okay, because Hebrew was developed sometime later on. Then there is the language of the Jews and the Arabic, the Phoenician and the Coptic languages. Best known are the Arabic, Aramaean and Hebraic, which are closely related to each other. Aramaic and Hebraic closest. They're sister languages. One is older than the other though. One of them must be the parent of the other. Yeah, the Aramaic of the Hebrew. The Jews assert that their language is the first and oldest in the world, and the argument is the fact that the Old Testament and the prophets were written in Hebrew. But as the authors, Moses, Ezra, etc., were Jews, they very naturally used their own language without regard to the age or prominence of Hebraic as a language. And as the Lord directed his revelations to the Jewish people, or God, or Christ directed his revelations to the Jewish people, it was only natural to put the revelations down in the language of the people for whom they were destined. The Jews further maintain that the reason why the history of Moses starts from Faxhad or Pashkad is that this man was a Jew. In refutation of this may be said, however, that the Lord, when he spoke, and Moses, when he wrote down the words of the Lord, according to the Jews, he didn't write anything. They admit that he didn't write anything, but here they're saying he did. Including the succession of generations from Faxhad, had no thought or intention of exhibiting the language of the Jew as the first and oldest. The pedigree is there and was put there because our Saviour would descend from Abraham. But the language of Abraham and his ancestors was Aramaic. Not only because Abraham descended from Aram, but Aram was really the geographical name of the country, of that geographical location, and for that very reason the inhabitants also were called Arameans. Abraham assumed or was given the name Hebrew because he crossed the river Euphrates. Okay, so he's given the name, he wasn't given the language. Heber or Eber is either a proper name denoting passage, a passer over or crosser over, or signifies beyond the Euphrates. Eber was a son of Salah or Shelah, son of Arphaxad, son of Shem. Don't forget this is probably from the Syriac. That's why the names have that difference. The first time he is called Hebrew is in the first book of Moses, Brita, or Genesis in English, chapter 14-13. When Abraham went from Ur in Chaldea, he went far from the house of his father. We just found it in Genesis 11. He lived in a tent, or maybe this is the extended story of it. He lived in a tent and moved from place to place as in the custom of shepherds. He came in contact with many different peoples. His language was in all probability influenced by other tongues, i.e. in Canaan. Okay? So that's why they adopted the name El, which was the name of a pagan god, instead of using the real name of God, the true name of God, El, E-I-L. They scripted it wrong, according to the translator Victor and Alexander. Somebody wrote it down wrong. So it's not El, it's El. So you have El Shaddai, etc. E-I-L. We have an evidence of this. When Jacob and Laban raised a pillar of stone as a witness of the covenant, Jacob called the monument Gal-Ed, the heap of witnesses, but Laban called it Jigasahadutha, heap of testimony. The word signifies the same thing, but Laban spoke his own language. The word is still to be found in the Syriac language, while Jacob used a foreign tongue of which he had acquired knowledge. It must be kept in mind that nearly 430 years passed from the time from Abraham's immigration from Ur in Chaldea to the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. And in all these many years the Israelites lived among people with whom they had nothing in common. It would therefore not be strange if the Hebraic language was altered through foreign influences. The 5 books of Moses were written previous to the Israelites' crossing of the river Jordan on the journey back to the land of Canaan. Their experience during the captivity had taught them the necessity of being cautious, and we know too that the rules of life adopted pursuant to experience were carried into effect. But the seclusion resulting from such a policy kept their language, as all their other things and institutions, from being changed. And in the course of time and development, this influential language of the Jews, the exclusive possession of the nation, grew to be the strongest tie that bound the children of Israel together. The language became the symbol of religion and of national re-erection as well. Here's a relief on the steps of Xerxes at Persepolis, and here's a picture of Darius at Issus. From the house of Abraham originated 2 different languages, the Hebrew or Hebraic. Yeah, this was developed later. Coming from Isaac, there you go. It's coming from Isaac's days, or for Isaac, from Isaac, the son of Abraham, and the Arabic from Ishmael. It is said in the Old Testament, as in the New, that centuries after centuries, the Arameans and Assyrians lived in Mesopotamia, the cradle of mankind, and ruled over the country and over the Aramaic language, which our first parents, Adam and Eve, spoke in paradise. Shana Atika Sabreya, sacred scribal, the old tongue language of God that he spoke to them with, and which Noah and his family used in the ark. This language was handed down from one generation to another, developed and spread as far as to the countries of Asia where it was used as the language of the rulers and the courts in preference to the Hebrew tongue. 2 Kings 18:26. Cyrus, the king of Persia, used the Aramaic language when he issued a proclamation directing the Israelites held in captivity in his kingdom to return to their native land and rebuild the temple of Jerusalem. Ezra 1:1-2. The letter of complaint which Mithredath and other prominent men sent to Artaxerxes, the Persian king, to frustrate the rebuilding of the temple was written in the Syrian Aramaic tongue and interpreted in the Syrian tongue. This is expressly stated in Ezra 4:7. Elsewhere in the Bible we have further proofs. In cuneiform inscriptions on tablets of clay and on walls of the ruins of Nineveh and Babylon, compared with the chronological tables of the civil history of Greece, all go to show that more than 2,000 years BC were all the Semites living in the territory extending from the Persian Gulf in the east to the Mediterranean Sea in the west, from the Arabian desert in the south to the mountains of Armenia in the north, united and formed a nation under the supremacy of Assyria and Babylonia. And the official language, as well as the language of the people of this powerful empire, was the Aramaic. This tongue was used in the temples and at the court of the emperors, and as the governors and other officials of the provinces spoke the language, and of course used it in their official dealings with foreign peoples, Aramaic by and by was carried far beyond the limits of the Babylonian and Syrian Empire. During this period, the Aramaic language was as near to be the universal language as in English today. The history of Egypt records that between the years 2080 and 1552 BC, there ruled in that country a line of kings given the name of Hyksos. They came from Syria